Hello, Bible Geeks. Ryan Schumacher here. We're here with week 2 of this season of Bible Geeks, the Old Testament in today's world. I have done a lot of work to try and make the audio better. So I'm hoping this video is going to be more pleasant to listen to. In case anybody's wondering, I had 3 different microphones that were picking things up, which was leading to a really metallic sound. I was doing a lot of editing, and it was getting a little better, but not too much. So I think this is going to be a lot better. All right, I'm really excited for this one. Week 2 here, the theology of creation. So again, we're going through the Old Testament's theology as we're going through the New City Catechism at church. And we're trying to understand it from the perspective of those in the times of the writers. We talked a lot last week about how we can't import our 21st century assumptions into a 21st century BC text. So how do we get behind the text a little bit more, understand it in its context, so we can get the full revelation of God, what God was trying to tell us, and to avoid making the text try and say things or answer things that it was never designed to do? I think that creation is one of the places where this happens more than anything else. So I'm really excited to dig into the Old Testament theology of creation, humans and the cosmos. What is it? What does the Old Testament teach us about who we are and what the world is? Okay, so what we're going to look at today is the Old Testament theology of creation. We're going to compare it to the ancient Near East, and then we're going to see how that compares to contemporary questions, or maybe to give you a little preview how it doesn't. And then we're going to talk about the image of God, the imago Dei, what that really meant. How would an ancient person understand that? And maybe if we can understand what it really means, which I suspect is different from what a lot of people think, how does that help us understand who we are as humans, much more than with our current understanding of what that image is? All right, so we're going to start with creation. Now, when I say creation, what do we think of as creation? I would say in our 21st century context, there's 2 things that we would generally think of when we think of creation. So one of those is going to be what I'd call Big Bang cosmology. So, and I think what lots of people would call Big Bang cosmology. So this is that all the matter that was in existence was in an infinitely dense point at some point in the 4 billion year past. And it expanded. There was an explosion of all that matter. Everything that is now in existence came from a single point in an explosion, primordial explosion, that then became the universe. And that we will sometimes read Genesis 1 with this idea, or read the Bible through the lens of this cosmology. The other thing I think, and certainly for us Christians we would think of it this way, is the Garden of Eden, the story from Genesis. So I think these are the things that come to mind. When we say creation, it's either going to be a biblical understanding or something rooted in the story of Genesis, or it's going to be modern cosmology, the Big Bang Theory. So let's go take a look at Genesis 1 and see what we see, or try to understand it in the way that an ancient person would. So let's open it up here. Genesis 1:1, the famous lie, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." So here you have a statement of creation. So the very first line of the Bible, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." So the heavens and the earth are things that were created by God. Now the earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God hovered over the waters. Here's an interesting thing here. This sentence has so many things to break down in it. First of all, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and void. It's not giving us really anything about how the earth was created. It just says that God created it, and then it was formless and void. And then you've got this idea of darkness is over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God hovered over the waters. So here's an interesting thing. God created the heavens and the earth. Okay, earth's formless and void. So we can say, maybe what's happening here is the earth hasn't been made yet. But water is there already. How is there water before there's earth? Is there water out in space? So this is an interesting thing here. We talked about the Spirit of God hovering over the waters in the question answer video that I did last week. So here we're going to focus on the waters. We're going to skip verses 3 through 5 for a moment. You all know it. But 6 through 8. And God said, "Let there be a dome in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." So God made the dome and separated the waters that were under the dome from the waters that were above the dome. And it was so. God called the dome sky. There was evening and there was morning the second day. I want to read that again because I think it was, my cadence was a little confused. I actually was wondering, am I reading my own notes or am I reading the Bible right now? So God made the dome and separated the waters that were under the dome from the waters that were above the dome. And it was so. And God called the dome sky. And there was evening, there was morning the second day. Okay, there's still no ground yet. There's no earth yet, but there's water. Again, we're doubling down on this idea. We're separating water from water with a dome. And then God said, "Let the waters under the sky be gathered together in one place, and let the dry land appear." So now, it's not quite clear what it means to be gathered together in one place, but we do know what "let dry land appear" is. And it was so, and God called the dry land earth. The waters that were gathered together, he called the seas. And God saw that it was good. So you've got now earth and then sea. The waters that are there are just the waters that were there at the very beginning, just in a different place. God has sort of separated and carved them out. But it doesn't say, "In the beginning, God made the water." The water is already there. And then God said, "Let there be lights in the dome of the sky to separate the day from the night. Let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years. Let them be lights in the dome of the sky to give them light upon the earth." So here we have a function for these lights. Let there be lights separating day from night, and let them be for signs and seasons, days and years, so the calendar. And it was so. And God made the two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. God set them in the dome of the sky to give light upon the earth. So now this dome that was made in verses 6 through 8, now the lights are being set in the dome. And that dome is holding back water. And these are, so God set them upon the dome of the sky to give light upon the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good, and there was evening, morning, the fourth day. All right, so what do we have? We got waters there before anything else has been formed, and it doesn't say in the beginning God created water. It said the Spirit of God was hovering over the water. The water was already there. The waters then separated from waters via a dome. So there's this just sea, and then there's a vaulted dome that now is holding back waters. Other waters are gathered, and there's earth, and then there's lights set in the dome. It sure looks a lot like what you might think if you look up, right? You see blue above. Well, what's blue? The water's blue. It sure kind of looks like a dome, doesn't it? And we see lights in the dome. We see the sun. We see the moon. We see the stars. The waters then ebb to reveal dry land. So, almost everybody's been to a large body of water where it just looks like it goes on for infinity. And the celestial lights are placed across the dome. This is what happens in these first few chapters or verses, I should say, of Genesis. So does this sound like our view of the world, where we have the sun in the middle, we have empty space, there's this sphere of earth, the moon that goes around it. So the earth goes around the sun, moon goes around the earth, and out there, so rather than a dome, we have a sphere, and out there is just emptiness. We know there's space because we can travel through it, but these lights are billions upon billions of light years away. If you traveled at the speed of light, it would take you billions of years to get to many of these lights that we see, the stars. So they're not emblazoned upon a dome, they're way, way out there. So does what we just read sound like our view of the world? I don't think it does. I don't think you think it does. Okay, so what about this? Does it sound like this? Now, what is this, you might say? This is an Egyptian painting that depicts the Egyptian view of cosmology, how the cosmos is, how the world is, and it's intertwined with their creation story. So at the top, you have the solid sky, which is actually the goddess, the Egyptian goddess Nut. So she is in what shape here? So Nut is in what you could call, a dome. She is solid, and the stars are emblazoned upon her body. Here, you have the earth below, which is actually the Egyptian god Geb. And so Geb and Nut used to be a thing, and now they're not a thing. And so you've got something in the middle. You've got earth and sky separated by this dome, held up by air, the air god Shu. So Shu's job is to keep the dome up and separated from the earth. Now, what else do you have? You might notice something, and it might be hard to figure out exactly what it is, but notice all these dots here that are on Nut's backside there. What do we see? Nut is holding back water. And in fact, if you're wondering whether or not that's true or whether I'm just making it up, you actually see this boat here, right? It's called a bark. And it's what color? It's yellow. Oh, I don't know. What else is in the sky that's yellow? The sun. Right here you see Ra. Ra is the Egyptian sun god. Ra is sailing across the sky in the waters across the dome. And you can see another one over here. So you can see like multiple, lights. The idea that, the solar bark goes up and then it comes down. This actually matches Genesis 1 pretty well. At risk of putting too fine a point on it, if we were to go back here and you were to show this to an Israelite, they have no clue what this is. Israelites, on the other hand, and for no other reason they spend a bunch of time in Egypt, but also because of their cosmology, they'd know exactly what this is. This makes sense to them because this is the same kind of cosmology that you find in Genesis 1. It is ancient cosmology. It is not modern cosmology. Also, just incidentally as a point, it is not medieval cosmology. And it's not 24th or 25th century humanity cosmology either. So let us not have the hubris that whatever model of the cosmos we have right now, I mostly expect that 200 years from now, they'll be looking back on us saying, for a long time, those people believed that all matter in the universe was in this one spot and then it just exploded. They called it the Big Bang. It was this really weird thing. And before you say, oh, no, that won't happen, it wasn't that long ago, maybe 70 years, 60 years. We're in 2021 right now. So I'd say maybe 60 years, 60, 70 years when the Big Bang caught on. Before that, and all of if you were to go to physicists like Einstein, you go to physicists like Niels Bohr, the idea would be primarily a steady state universe, that the universe had always been, and there was no initial moment of creation or expansion. That's even a new idea. It's less than 100 years old. Our cosmology has changed before, it will change again. So the only kind of cosmology that it would actually make sense for the Bible to speak in would be the cosmology of the people at the time, because the text had to mean something to them. So this right here is the ancient Hebrew conception of the universe. This is what you see in Genesis 1. You have the vaulted dome here. You have the waters above the firmament. You have the waters below. You have the earth and the seas. You have the sun, moon, and stars. You have a little breakthrough every now and then to get rain to come through. And these things are traveling on along the dome. They're actually inside the dome. And then you've got God above in the heavens. So the heavens are God's dwelling place above us here on earth. And then the underworld Sheol, is actually in the ground. And then down here, you've got the waters of chaos. You got Leviathan swimming around there. You might know him from Job 41. This is what the ancient Hebrews would think the universe looked like. This is what we see in this Egyptian painting awfully similarly. This is Genesis 1. This is what it's talking about. So it means that Genesis 1 is written as ancient cosmic geography being John Walton's term. As I mentioned before, John Walton's book, right here, the Old Testament Theology for Christians. I almost said Ancient Context to Enduring Belief. That's the subtitle. Old Testament Theology for Christians is kind of one of the primary texts that I'm drawing this particular study from. So I'm borrowing his term here, cosmic geography, but Genesis 1 is ancient cosmic geography. This means that when God was revealing something to us in Genesis 1, he's not revealing science, folks. God didn't see the need to update the ancients' view of the cosmos, to give them a proper Big Bang cosmology. It's not in there. There's no Big Bang. That's not the point. God didn't provide a Copernican view of the world. God inspired the writers to speak to people and use their cultural idiom to do so in order for communication to take place. We cannot expect an ancient text to answer post-Enlightenment questions. It won't do that. We cannot expect the ancient text to have the Copernican understanding of the solar system or a post-satellite understanding of what the Earth is. So to understand Genesis 1, we got to drop our 21st century assumptions about what origins is supposed to mean. And we have to think like an ancient to understand the theology behind it, because that's what's being revealed. It's a theology. So instead, I'm going to direct us not to physics, but to other ancient Near Eastern creation stories. And there's many we could go to, but for illustration purposes, I'm going to focus on one because it's got a lot of really good examples. And this is the Babylonian epic known as the Enuma Elish. So this is the Babylonian creation story. It's recorded on 7 stone tablets. These were discovered kind of progressively, I think, in the 19th century. Is it in the British Museum? I don't know. I should cut that part out because I don't know it to be true. But I'll leave it in. I think at least at one point it was in the British Museum. Dating this is difficult. We don't really know. Could be anywhere to like even prior to the bondage in Egypt, where the Israelites were stuck in Egypt. Some people put it maybe 1,000 years later, around the time of Saul. We don't really know when this was written, but this is ancient Near Eastern. We do know that it was part of Babylon. So this is the creation story, which recalls, and we talked about this last week, Theomachy, the War of the Gods. It is the war between Marduk and Tiamat. And Marduk is then creating humans out of the remains of Tiamat. And there's some other gods that play a role in this as well. Marduk, of course, being like the primary god of the Babylonians, is kind of a tribal god, if you will. All right, so we're going to look at the opening of the Enuma Elish. These are the very first lines in the Babylonian creation myth. So when the skies above were not yet named, nor earth below pronounced by name, only Apsu, the first one, their begetter and maker Tiamat, who bore them all, their waters, that's the two gods, commingling as a single body, but had not formed pastures, nor discovered reed beds. When yet no gods were manifest, nor names pronounced, nor destinies decreed, then gods were born within them. So here's the opening paragraph. So one of the things you might notice here is, like Genesis and Egypt, we got water again. Tiamat and Apsu, their waters commingling. So like Apsu and Tiamat are almost like not even distinct at this point. But there's primordial water. So this, I'm calling it the rage against the sea. This is a very prominent idea within ancient cosmology and ancient creation. So Tiamat actually is the Babylonian primordial goddess of the sea, who Marduk then defeats. We'll see this in Canaanite mythology as well. Baal, the storm god, who's the one upon whom the Canaanites depended the most. Had to defeat Yam, the deity of the sea, to then become the king of the gods. So we've got a war between Marduk and Tiamat. We've got a war between Baal and Yam. We even actually have in Job 41, Yahweh talking about his defeat of Leviathan. I mentioned this in the slide before, but the waters of chaos had chaos monsters in them. And Leviathan was the monster of the sea. Behemoth was the one of the land. And they're associated with like desolation or chaos. So Behemoth would be in the desert, and Leviathan would be in the seas. So the sea, imagine just being an ancient person and standing at the edge of the sea and seeing nothing but just waves of water for as far as you could far as you could understand. It's a swirling chaos, swallowing nothingness. It's disorder. There's no function to it. You just sit over top of it, but it will swallow you up. It went on forever, and these creation stories are about how the gods brought order to this chaos and disorder. It's not about bringing matter into existence. That's not what they talked about. The sea was defeated, and order was brought to it. So point number one here, God is bringing order to chaos. We see that in the Babylonian, we see that in the Egyptian, we see that in the Hebrew conception. Order out of chaos. So we shouldn't be stressing about reading science into the text. It's not the point. At risk of putting too fine a point on it again, Old Earth, Young Earth is asking 17th century questions of 1000 BC text. Greater than 1000 BC text. I'd date it earlier. I'd date it closer to 2000. You're asking the text the wrong question. So let's look at another feature of this opening paragraph here. So what's something you might observe about this opening? So we'll look at it again. The skies were not yet named, nor earth below pronounced by name, only Apsu, the first one, their begetter, and the maker, Tiamat, who bore them all, their waters commingling as a single body, but had not formed pastures, nor discovered reed beds, when yet no gods were manifest, nor names pronounced, nor destinies decreed, then gods were born within them. Okay, thing to notice here, when the skies above were not yet named, nor earth below pronounced by name, nor names pronounced, nor destinies decreed, there's a lot of focus on names, and actually something I kind of wish I would have highlighted. You have the name of Apsu, you have the name of Tiamat, but nothing else is named. There's a lot about naming here, and I think we see that in the Genesis account too. Again, God said, let there be light, and there was light. This is the verses 3 to 5 that I skipped. God saw the light was good. God separated the light from the darkness, and he called the light day, and the darkness he called night. There's evening, morning, the first day. We see the naming. God names the lights. This is the first thing that God does. Let there be light. Okay, that's created, separates the light from the darkness, and then he names it. So just like, we're seeing the setting of the Enuma Elish, saying things don't have names yet. Only Apsu and Tiamat have names. Here, God creates something and then names it. So the naming becomes a very important part of creation. Now, when God named the lights, here's an interesting question, and credit to Dr. Walton on this. Why not just call the light light? After all, God said, let there be light, but then he called the light day. So he's sort of renaming it. Why would that happen? Also, you might just, as a quick digression, remember that some very key New Testament situations involved name changes. Saul becomes Paul. Simon becomes Peter. Naming is a very important thing to people, far more important to them than I think it is to us. So Dr. Walton's read on this, I find it compelling. God made a period of light and a period of darkness separated from each other. In essence, God making time. God created light, but then gave it a purpose and a function. So day is a time that's separated from the darkness. So he separates the light and the darkness and then says, okay, your day and your night. This is the sequence that we experience. There was evening and there was morning. That's the separation of the light from the darkness. And then that time of light is called day, and that time of darkness is called night. They're functional. It has a purpose now. It's not just electrons or photons or whatever we'd call it. I think they're probably photons. It's not just particles. The particles are doing something. There's a purpose and a function to it. So I want to try and help with this thinking a little bit. I want to use an analogy. You got a kettle right here, okay? This kettle is boiling. And the question is, why is the water boiling? Now, the way that I think a 21st century person is going to think of this question, the answer is going to be, well, it was liquid, but then energy enters in and it excites the particles And by introducing energy into the system, they move faster and eventually they spring free and there's a matter state change and now you have a gas. And then that's the process of matter state change, boiling. So we call it. There's nothing false about this conception. That is absolutely true. However, an ancient person is not going to understand chemistry. They were not going to describe it that way. Instead, another equally valid answer could very well be that the water's boiling because we want to have some tea. So the what or the how is the way that we think, but the why is what Genesis 1 is addressing. So this is the functional or the purpose kind of point of view, rather than the material origins point of view. I'm really hoping I don't get a lot of trouble for this class. I think I might, but I also think I'm on rock solid ground here. So we'll keep going. We'll continue to describe it because when you go through Genesis 1, this is what you see happens. God takes something. So, darkness is over the face of the deep, and then God gives it a function. So he creates light. He creates the period of light and the period of darkness, day and night. The waters. So there's these chaotic waters. God separates it out and says, "You're heavens." And then down here, he named the waters seas. He called out the land and then called it earth. And then the seas, a little bit later, he calls it a habitat for sea creatures. So God takes these primordial chaotic waters and then shoves some of them up towards the heavens. And then the ones down here, he's like, "You're going to be a habitat for the sea creatures." And then we're going to take you, pull you back a bit, and there's going to be land, and then that's going to be a habitat for the land. There's lights in the vaulted dome of heaven. And what are they for? Signs for appointed times. They're not just there to sit there and look pretty. They're signs for appointed times, days, and years. Calendar, times, seasons. When the sea creatures are created, God says, "Be fruitful and multiply." God is giving it a purpose. God is giving it a function. They're supposed to reproduce. "Let us make humankind in our image and likeness." We are given a charge as well. "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth, rule over the fish, the birds, and the animals." There's a functional description. There's a purpose behind the things that are being created. Yes, God is creating them. Yes, God did create them. But that's not the theological point of the story. Aside from maybe the very first line, which is trying to say, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." But we see these functional descriptions kind of all throughout the opening chapter of Genesis. So, point 1, God is bringing order to chaos. Point 2, God is giving things their purpose and function in Genesis 1. It's not an account of how or what, but of why. We're trying to understand why the pot is boiling, not how the pot is boiling. Okay. So then I would say we're eager to know if this is a purpose thing and humans are made in there. Why are we here? What is our purpose and our function? So now we're going to go from cosmos to humans. I'm going to take it back to the ancient Near East a little bit, though, before we can get to the answer to that question. So what are humans for? Well, in the, I was about to say ahatrosis. That's Esther, right? Atrahasis. Epic. So this is Akkadian, the Akkadian creation, the flood myth. So the opening line here in this myth, when the gods instead of man did the work, bore the loads, the gods' load was too great, the work too hard, the trouble too much. Isn't that weird? The opening line here, setting the stage for the creation and flood myth for the Akkadians, was the gods were doing work instead of man, and it was too much. Their work was too hard. It was too troublesome for the gods. This is the problem that creation is going to solve. So the solution then, so their work was too hard, their trouble was too much. Every day the earth resounded, the warning signal was loud. We kept hearing the noise. So then Belladilly, the womb goddess, is present. Let her create a mortal man so that he may bear the yoke. Yes, so that he may bear the yoke. The work of Elil, let men bear the load of the gods. This is, of course, the solution. Humans were made to work for the gods in the ancient Near East. That was the paradigm. That was the point. The Enuma Elish is going to take the exact same tactic here. When Marduk heard the god's speech, he conceived a desire to accomplish clever things. He opened his mouth, addressing Ea. He counsels that which he had pondered in his heart. I will bring together blood to form bone. I will bring into being Lulu, whose name will be man. I will create Lulu, man, on whom the toil of the gods will be laid, that they may rest. Bookmark right here. What are the gods doing? They're resting. What does God do in the seventh day? We'll get to that later. But on whom the toil of the gods will be laid, that they may rest. So just like the Atrahasis epic, here in the Enuma Elish, the humans are created. Why? To take on labor for the gods. So in the ancient Near East, humans were made to serve the gods because the gods had labor that was too hard. Humans would work for the gods. They would sacrifice to them, and in exchange, the gods would care for humans. This is the concept John Walton calls the great symbiosis. So we're in a symbiotic relationship with the gods. Now, if things are going well, you were meeting the needs of your gods. If things were going unwell, you were displeasing to the gods or not sufficiently nourishing or sacrificing to them. So the gods had needs, and they needed humans to meet those needs. The humans would figure out what the gods needed through divination, and they could maybe take some signals if things are going bad. Maybe the gods are upset. And then they would make those sacrifices and do those rituals, and then the gods would hopefully be pleased. Again, there was no idea of natural phenomena. Storms, they weren't saying like, well, it's kind of a high pressure system that's been stuck here for a while. But the rainy season is in 3 months. They didn't think that way. They didn't have an idea of regularity. When it rained, it's because Baal was acting. And why was Baal acting? Well, if it was a nice rainstorm on your crops right after you planted, it's because Baal is pleased with what you were doing. You've made the appropriate sacrifices. He's strong and he's happy, and so he's blessing you back. Retributive. You get what you deserve. That was very much the ancient point of view. You get what you deserve, and so whatever's happening to you is related to something that you are doing. So if you are being blessed, then that's because you were doing good stuff. So if you had rainfall and your crops are growing, you were moral. And if there was not rainfall, then Baal was punishing you. And if there was a terrible storm, Baal is angry. That's how this worked. And so they would constantly be looking for feedback on themselves in the natural world. There was a conflation of the natural and the moral that we separate. All right, so what are humans for in Genesis? First of all, one similarity in the biblical story, humans are also made for work. In Genesis 2:15, the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to till it and keep it. And then the Lord commanded him, you may eat freely out of every tree of the garden, etc., etc. But till and keep the land. This was a job that humans were given. Now, there's a crucial difference I want to point out. What were humans fashioned out of in the Enuma Elish? I will say Kingu. So he's the one who instigated the warfare, who made Tiamat rebel and set battle in motion. So Kingu's not a good god. They bound him, Kingu, holding him before Ea. They inflicted a penalty on him, severed his blood vessels, and from his blood, Ea, created mankind. So there you go. Made out of the blood of Tiamat, the blood of Kingu. In Genesis 1:26, what are humans made of? Then God said, let us make humankind in our image according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, over the cattle, and over the wild animals of the earth, over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. So God created humankind in his image, and in the image of God he created them, male and female he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves upon the earth. Before I move on, one thing I kind of wish I would have said last week about the divine council imagery here. So let us make humankind in our image. So we've asserted, at least I've asserted on this channel, that this is God speaking to the divine council. And there's a whole video about that from last week. Now, one could say, well, does that mean these council members are co-creators? No, you actually go on and see God is the only actor. So God is speaking to the divine council, but God is the only actor here. But here, humans are made in the divine image, according to the likeness of divinity. Like I said last week about Psalm 8, you made him a little bit lower than the gods, the Bene Elim. Okay, so what is this image of God that we are made out of or in? It's not out of, we're made in. So what we know from the text, it's both men and women. It makes us different from the animals, and it makes us like God in some way. Let us make humankind in our image. I'm going to give a little bit of credit to Michael Heiser, his book, The Unseen Realm. What's that right here? I don't like book jackets, so I took it off. But yeah, you can see Unseen Realm, Michael Heiser. He had a very good set of comments on this. I'm borrowing a lot from his argument there. I find it particularly compelling. Okay, so what is the image of God? And I'm taking this list from Dr. Heiser. I've encountered this stuff before, but he had a nice comprehensive list. Many ideas have been offered for the image of God. Human intelligence, human reason, emotions, the ability to pray, self-awareness, language, a soul or spirit, free will, conscience, the list goes on. All of these are like intellectual qualities, right? The image of God is that we have reason. It's a very Enlightenment thing to say, a very 18th century thing to say. It's because we have free will, conscience. I remember one Star Trek episode, self-awareness, intelligence, and consciousness, which is a little bit different than conscience. Some other things in here, though, are trying to maybe have a less intellectual, more spiritual point of view about it. So the ability to pray, that's what makes us in the image of God. Or a soul or a spirit. We're the only creatures that have souls, apparently, which actually isn't true. The animals have the same kind of, what's the Hebrew word? I can't remember the Hebrew word, but it's used to describe the animals elsewhere in the Bible. So many of these ideas have been offered. What might be the problem with calling these things the image of God? So I'm going to assert that the problem with this is that, first of all, some of these have those traits. Self-awareness. If you have a dog, you kind of know the dog knows. Dog has self-awareness. Can the dog pray? Probably not. Biblically, they would, the soul spirit distinction actually isn't the distinction between humans and animals. But maybe more crucially, not all humans have these things. So humans in development are not praying. They don't have formed consciences yet. They don't have the ability to reason. People who are at the very end of life or who are suffering dementia also can be said to have lost their reasoning capacity, their ability to pray, or whatever it happens to be. And so the question is, if you take that view of the image of God, then you don't have an argument to oppose abortion or euthanasia, because they're you would say they do not bear the image of God. But we all know that theologically, the Bible speaks about unformed people as humans, God's workmanship. There is complete respect for elders, regardless of their capacities. And so, you really start to get into a moral problem with classifying some humans as image bearers and others not. The Bible does not make that distinction. The Bible says humans are made in God's image. If you are of the species human, you are the image of God. I was going to say, arguably AI is about to do a whole bunch of these things too. So does, HAL 9000 get to be in the image of God? I don't think we're ready to go there. So again, understanding the Bible in the ancient context is essential. How do we understand this? Physical images of gods were placed in temples. We're going to do a little bit more on temple in a later class, whereby humans could encounter the gods on earth. Now, the image that was in the temple wasn't the god, but it was nonetheless the way to encounter the god in the temple. In fact, the very last thing that went into a temple was the image of the deity, some stone carving, let's say. So there was an image of a god that was representative of the god within the temple. Another thing that we see about images, kings. So kings were seen as divine, and physical images of the king would be placed in colonies. Why? To show who is in charge. You have a banner of the king in this distant colony. You would have an image of the king saying that this land belongs to this king. So these images were not physically identical to the king. Nobody thought that the banner that had the picture of the king was the king. Nobody thought that the Roman coin with the emperor's visage on it was the emperor. But it nonetheless was demonstrating an identity and a claim on a particular part of physical space, saying this belongs to the emperor. This belongs to this king. This belongs to this god. This is the way that the physical images function. And, quite frankly, there's not that much different for us today. You can go into government buildings and see pictures of the rulers. Certainly you can think of, many cases where that would be true. Genesis 1:26 seems to function similarly. Humankind is the physical manifestation of the claim that God has on creation. Humankind is the physical manifestation of the likeness of God in God's creation. We are the signs and symbols of who's in charge of this place. The image of God, and I hope this makes sense, the image of God is not a quality about humans. It is a status or a function. A status is something that's conferred upon you. An identity is sort of your self-understanding. A status is something that's given to you. So, you might be, or I might be male, but I am a master of biblical studies according to the board at Wheaton College, because I did my degree there, and it says, according to the Board of Regents, you fulfill the requirements, and so now I have a status to be considered a Master of Arts in Biblical Studies. So that's conferred upon me. Image of God is conferred upon us by God. It is not a quality about us. So I think Dr. Heiser puts this pretty well in his book. He says humankind was created as God's image. If we think of imaging as a verb or a function, the translation makes sense. We are created to image God, to be his imagers. My emphasis here, it is what we are by definition. Humans, by definition, are the image of God. If you are part of the species human, then you are an image of God or an imager of God. The image is not an ability we have, but a status. Again, the status conferred upon you. We are God's representatives on earth. To be human is to image God. I think that's what's coming through here. And Dr. Walton puts it the same way. The image of God in the Old Testament is therefore seen as a status given by God. So in conferring the status, God identifies people with him. In doing so, and I like where he goes with this, he is revealing the identity that humans should adopt if they want to conceive of themselves in a way that will allow them to properly understand how they should live in order to serve the purpose for which God has created them. So we should be adopting the idea of the image of God in order to live into the purpose that we have as humans. But being the image of God is a status. It is not an ability. It is something conferred upon humans by God. So anything that is human is in the image of God, and anything that is not human is not in the image of God. And it is our status, and therefore our function and purpose, to reflect God into his world. And I think this comes out a little bit in what God then asks humans to do. Let us make humankind in our image according to our likeness, and then let them have dominion over the fish and the birds and all of that. We are given co-regency in the garden. We are to rule and subdue. It goes even further, chapter 2. Then the Lord God said, "It is not good that the man should be alone. I will make him a helper as his partner." So out of the ground the Lord God formed every animal of the field and every bird of the air, which brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And whatever the man called every living creature, that was its name. Man gave names to all the cattle and the birds of the air, etc. From an ancient Near Eastern perspective, what would you be picking up here? Remember the opening to the Enuma Elish. God brought the animals to see what man would call them. And whatever the man called every living creature, that was its name. The man gave names to everything. We have names here again. Humans engaged in a divine creative function of naming. God named things, and then God made the human, and then said, let the human have dominion over the garden, and I'm going to bring all the animals, and the human's going to name. We are the stand-ins, the representatives of God. Not long before this, it said, till the garden and keep it. God has deputized us to do this in his garden so that we are to work on his behalf. We are God's co-workers in the garden. That is what we are made for. That's built into the text of Genesis. I'm not making it up. It's right here. So point 1, God is bringing order out of chaos. Point 2, God is giving things purpose and function. And point 3, we are the imagers of God. We are those deputized to rule and subdue the creation, tending the garden the way that Yahweh would have it be done. So this means that baked into the Old Testament theology is this idea that humans have a job to do, that we're supposed to be working alongside God. So rather than Genesis 1 being a statement about where physical matter came from, we get to learn that God brings order to chaos. We get to learn that God gives things function and purpose and meaning. And then we learn that our meaning is to reflect God into the world, that we are to be working alongside God in the garden. That, look, God didn't need us, but God made us. And God, made it that way to work through us. That's God's prerogative. And that's what happened. And so I think this is what we should be learning from Genesis 1. Mainly, it should be, yes, God is the creator. That did happen. God, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And there's no denial on my part that God created material things. I am just saying that's not the point of the story at the beginning of Genesis. Humanity and cosmos are given function and order because of God. And our purpose is then to be the imager of God, the reflection of God, the sign of the claim that this is God's territory in the world. We aren't made to be saved. We were made for a purpose. And so that's the main thing, that God didn't just make us so he could save us. We were made to be part of God's co-workers in creation. And I think that's a different perspective on humanity than we often have. And it's a different perspective on the image of God. So anyway, that's all for now. We're trying to keep it a little bit on the shorter side. Absolutely more could be said. But I appreciate you hanging out with me here. I hope you enjoyed it. And tune in next time, please. God bless.